Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully cleaned the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle lying across the maintenance table. The weapon gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the armory at Fort Bragg, its every component meticulously maintained. To most people walking past, she appeared to be just another civilian contractor doing routine maintenance work on military equipment. They had no idea that the woman methodically cleaning each part of the rifle had once held one of the most impressive long-range shooting records in modern military history. The morning sun streamed through the small windows of the armory as Sarah worked in comfortable silence. She had been doing this job for 3 years now, ever since leaving active duty. It was honest work that kept her connected to the world she had once dominated, even if nobody knew about her extraordinary past. The pay was decent, the hours predictable, and most importantly, it allowed her to stay invisible. Sarah had learned to appreciate invisibility. After everything that had happened in Afghanistan, after the mission that had changed her life forever, she craved the quiet anonymity of civilian life. No more briefings at dawn, no more impossible shots across impossible distances, no more weight of life and death decisions resting on her shoulders. Just her, the rifles, and the meditative process of keeping these precision instruments in perfect working order. As she disassembled the bolt assembly, her fingers moved with practiced efficiency. Every spring, every pin, every component was familiar territory. She could strip and reassemble an M2010 blindfolded, a skill that had served her well during her years as one of the Army's most elite snipers. But those days felt like a lifetime ago now. The armory door swung open, letting in a blast of humid North Carolina air along with the sound of boots on concrete. Sarah glanced up briefly to see a group of soldiers entering for their weekly equipment check. She nodded politely and returned to her work, hoping to remain unnoticed. Most days, she succeeded in blending into the background of military life without drawing attention to herself. Among the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man with the unmistakable bearing of special operations. His eyes swept the armory with the practiced awareness of someone who had seen combat, taking in every detail, every person, every potential threat or advantage. When his gaze fell on Sarah, it lingered longer than casual interest would warrant. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years, and in that time, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people. Something about the woman cleaning the sniper rifle caught his attention. It wasn't just her obvious familiarity with the weapon, though that was impressive enough. It was the way she held herself, the precise movements of her hands, the unconscious professional habits that marked someone who had done far more than simply maintain these weapons. Sarah felt his scrutiny, but kept her eyes on her work. She had become expert at avoiding conversations that might lead to questions about her background. Most people were content to accept her as a civilian contractor and leave it at that. But this man's attention felt different, more knowing, more persistent. "That's beautiful work," Marcus said, approaching her table. His voice carried the easy confidence of someone comfortable in military environments. "You handle that rifle like you've done more than clean it." Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their methodical work. "It's important to understand the equipment you're maintaining," she replied without looking up. "These weapons save lives when they work perfectly. That's worth taking seriously." Marcus studied her more intently. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Her movements were too precise, too automatic to belong to someone who had only worked with these rifles from a maintenance perspective. She handled the weapon with the kind of intimate knowledge that came from years of operational use. "Have we met before?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "You seem familiar." Sarah finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Her eyes were steady, professional, giving nothing away. "I don't think so. I'd remember." But even as she said it, Sarah felt a flicker of recognition. There was something about this SEAL that seemed familiar to her as well. The way he carried himself, the careful attention he paid to his surroundings, the particular intensity in his eyes when he looked at the rifle she was working on. She had encountered many special operations personnel during her military career, but most of those interactions had been brief and mission-focused. Marcus nodded slowly, but the feeling of familiarity wouldn't leave him. As a SEAL, he had worked alongside Army snipers on numerous occasions, particularly during joint operations in Afghanistan. Some of the best shots he had ever witnessed had come from Army sniper teams, and there had been one shooter in particular whose reputation had been legendary among special operations communities. "You know," he said, leaning against the table, "I've worked with a lot of snipers over the years, some incredible shooters. There was this one Army sniper in Afghanistan who made a shot that everyone still talks about, over 2,900 meters in impossible conditions. Nobody could believe it when word got around." Sarah's hands stilled completely this time. She set down the cleaning rod she had been using and looked at Marcus with new wariness. The shot he was describing was her shot, the one that had made her career and ultimately ended it. The 2,940-meter kill that had taken out a high-value target and saved the lives of an entire Army patrol, but had also put her on every enemy sniper's hit list in the region. "That sounds impressive," she said carefully, her voice neutral. "Must have been quite a shooter." Marcus watched her reaction closely. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way she had stopped working entirely, the carefully controlled tone of her voice. Every instinct he had developed over years of combat and intelligence work was telling him that this woman knew more about that legendary shot than she was letting on. "It was more than impressive," he continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "It was the kind of shot that changes military doctrine. The kind that gets written about in sniper schools. The shooter was identified only by a call sign in the reports I saw, but the shot itself became famous throughout the special operations community." Sarah resumed cleaning the rifle, but her movements were more deliberate now, less fluid. She could feel the weight of his attention, the growing suspicion in his questions. Part of her wanted to deflect and change the subject, but another part of her, the part that had once taken pride in being one of the Army's best snipers, was curious about what he knew. "What made the shot so special?" she asked, despite herself. Marcus smiled slightly, recognizing that he had struck a nerve. "Everything about it was impossible. The distance, first of all. Nearly 3,000 meters is beyond the effective range of most sniper systems. But it wasn't just the distance. The weather conditions were terrible, high winds, extreme heat causing mirage effects. The target was moving, and the shot had to be taken from an elevated position with a significant angle of declination." As he spoke, Sarah remembered that day with crystal clarity. The intelligence had been solid, but time-sensitive. A high-ranking Taliban commander was moving through a valley with a small convoy, heading toward a position where he could coordinate an attack on an isolated American patrol. Sarah and her spotter had been positioned on a ridgeline nearly 3 kilometers away, the only Allied forces close enough to intervene. The wind had been gusting unpredictably, creating heat mirages that made accurate ranging nearly impossible. Her spotter had calculated the ballistics 3 times before they felt confident enough to attempt the shot. Even then, the probability of success had been estimated at less than 30%. "But here's what really made it legendary," Marcus continued, watching her face carefully. "The shooter only took one shot. One round, one kill, at a distance where most snipers would expect to fire multiple rounds just to get close. That kind of precision under those conditions doesn't happen by accident. It takes years of training, perfect understanding of ballistics, and maybe a little bit of divine intervention." Sarah said nothing, but Marcus could see the recognition in her eyes now. She knew exactly which shot he was talking about because she had been the one to take it. The question was whether she would admit it or continue to maintain her cover as a simple maintenance contractor. The armory had grown quiet around them. The other soldiers had completed their equipment checks and moved on, leaving Sarah and Marcus alone with the tension building between them. Sarah realized that her peaceful anonymity was about to come to an end. This seal had somehow connected her to her past, and she would have to decide whether to trust him with the truth or find a way to maintain her cover. She looked down at the M2010 in her hands, the same model rifle she had used for that famous shot. The weight of it, the familiar contours, the precision engineering that had made her career possible. For 3 years, she had been content to simply maintain these weapons for other people to use. But sitting here now, with someone who understood and respected what she had accomplished, she felt the first stirring of something she thought she had buried forever. Pride. Sarah set the cleaning rod down and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. The pretense was becoming impossible to maintain, and something about this Navy SEAL made her think he could be trusted with the truth. After years of hiding, part of her was almost relieved to be recognized for what she had accomplished. "You seem to know a lot about that shot," she said quietly. "More than what would be in most reports." Marcus nodded slowly. "I was in Afghanistan when it happened. Word traveled fast through the special operations community. We were operating in the same region, and that shot probably saved a lot of lives beyond the immediate tactical situation. The intelligence network it disrupted, the confidence it gave to our forces, the fear it put into enemy snipers. Effects like that ripple outward." Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What she saw was genuine respect and professional curiosity. Marcus had the bearing of someone who understood the weight of what they were discussing, who knew the difference between bragging about kills and acknowledging legitimate military achievements. "The shooter's call sign was Ghost 7, Marcus continued, "but I never learned the real name. All I knew was that it was an Army sniper, part of a 2-person team, and that the shot had been verified by multiple sources. It became one of those stories that gets told in the teams, the kind that inspires people and sets new standards for what's possible." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She had spent 3 years building a new life based on anonymity and distance from her military past. But sitting here now, talking to someone who clearly understood and respected what she had done, she found herself wanting to reclaim that part of her identity. "My spotter was the one who made that shot possible," she said finally. "Sergeant Danny Okafor. Best wind reader I ever worked with. He calculated the ballistics, adjusted for the atmospheric conditions, and gave me the confidence to take a shot that should have been impossible." Marcus felt a chill of recognition run down his spine. "You're Ghost 7. Sarah nodded slowly. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment Sniper Section. Retired." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "And yes, that was my shot." The weight of the revelation hung in the air between them. Marcus had just discovered that he was talking to one of the most legendary snipers in recent military history, someone whose achievements had become the stuff of special operations folklore. Sarah, meanwhile, had just revealed her identity to a complete stranger for the first time since leaving the military. 2,940 meters, Marcus said with something approaching awe. "I've met a lot of incredible shooters, but that shot is in a class by itself." Sarah began reassembling the rifle, her movements now flowing with the unconscious precision of someone who had performed this task thousands of times under every conceivable condition. "It wasn't just about the distance," she said. "The tactical situation made it critical. There was an Army patrol trapped in an overwatch position about 15 kilometers away. The Taliban commander I was targeting was coordinating a complex attack that would have overrun their position." As she spoke, The details of that day came flooding back. The intelligence officer who had briefed them on the target's movements, the helicopter insertion to the ridgeline position, the hours of waiting and observation before the target finally appeared. Most of all, she remembered the weight of responsibility, knowing that her shot was the only thing standing between an American patrol and certain death. "We had been in position for 8 hours," Sarah continued, her hands working automatically as she spoke. "The target was supposed to move through the valley at dawn, but he didn't show until late afternoon. By then, the atmospheric conditions were terrible for long-range shooting. Heat mirages, shifting winds, dust in the air from convoy movement." Marcus leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story. As a SEAL, he had been in similar situations where everything depended on one person's skill and decision-making under impossible pressure. He understood the kind of mental discipline required to perform at that level. "Danny spent 2 hours studying the wind patterns and calculating the ballistics," Sarah went on. "We're talking about a bullet that would be in flight for over 6 seconds, falling more than 300 feet by the time it reached the target. Any change in wind speed or direction during that time and the shot would miss by dozens of meters." She paused in her work, staring at the rifle as the memories took hold. The thing that made it really challenging was the angle. We were shooting down into the valley from an elevated position, which affects the ballistics in ways that are hard to calculate precisely. Plus, the target wasn't stationary. He was moving with his security detail, so I had to lead the shot by several meters. Marcus shook his head in amazement. The ballistics alone would challenge most people with a calculator and unlimited time. To do it in a tactical situation, with lives on the line, that takes something special. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time since he had started asking questions, she smiled genuinely. "What it takes is training, practice, and a spotter you trust completely. Danny and I had worked together for 2 years before that shot. We knew each other's thought processes, could communicate with minimal words, had built the kind of partnership that makes impossible shots possible." "What happened to him?" Marcus asked. "Your spotter?" Sarah's expression darkened. "That's part of why I left the military. Danny was killed 6 weeks later on a different mission. IED took out his vehicle while they were moving to a new position. After that, I couldn't find the same chemistry with another spotter. The trust, the communication, the instinctive understanding of each other's capabilities. It's not something you can force or replicate easily." Marcus nodded with understanding. He had lost teammates as well, and knew how their absence could fundamentally change your ability to operate at the highest level. The bonds formed in combat were unlike anything in civilian life. And when they were broken, they left gaps that were almost impossible to fill. "Is that why you're here now?" he asked. "Maintaining rifles instead of using them?" Sarah finished reassembling the M2010 and set it carefully in its case. "Partly, but it's also because of what happened after that famous shot. Word got out somehow, probably through intelligence channels, and I became a high-priority target for every enemy sniper in the region. They put a bounty on my head that made it impossible to operate effectively." She stood and began organizing her cleaning supplies, her movements efficient and purposeful. "The last 6 months of my deployment, I spent more time being protected than doing my job. It reached a point where my presence was actually endangering missions instead of supporting them. So when my enlistment was up, I decided to get out and find a different way to serve." Marcus watched her work, impressed by her matter-of-fact attitude toward what must have been an incredibly difficult decision. To walk away from a career where you had achieved legendary status, where your skills were desperately needed because your success had made you a liability. It took a special kind of character to make that choice. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The operational work, I mean." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Every day," she said finally. There's nothing in civilian life that comes close to the intensity, the precision, the sense of purpose. Maintaining these rifles is satisfying work, but it's not the same as using them to protect people who can't protect themselves. She looked at the M2010 one more time before closing the case. But I've made peace with it. I had my time in the spotlight, made my contribution, and now I'm serving in a different way. These weapons I maintain might save lives in the hands of other snipers. That has to be enough. Marcus stood as well, sensing that their conversation was coming to a natural conclusion. But he had one more question, the one that had been building since he first recognized who she was. What if it didn't have to be enough? He asked. What if there was a way to use your skills again, but without the visibility that made you a target? Sarah looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean that the special operations community never stopped talking about Ghost 7. Your skills, your achievements, they've become legendary. But legends have a way of inspiring people, of setting new standards, of pushing the boundaries of what everyone thinks is possible. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There are training programs, specialized schools, places where your knowledge and experience could help create the next generation of elite snipers. Ways to serve that don't involve being in the field yourself, but do involve passing on what you've learned to people who need it. Sarah felt something stir inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. The possibility of returning to the world she loved, of using her skills and knowledge in a meaningful way without having to worry about enemy bounties or becoming a target herself. What kind of programs? She asked, trying to keep the interest out of her voice. Marcus smiled, recognizing the spark of curiosity in her eyes. Let me make some calls. I think there are people who would be very interested in meeting the woman behind the legend. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in front of a nondescript building at Fort Liberty, holding a visitor's badge and wondering if she had made the right decision. Marcus had been true to his word, making calls that led to meetings that led to this moment. She was about to interview for a position as a senior instructor at the Army's premier sniper school. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving. Some of the most important military training facilities were deliberately unremarkable, designed to blend into their surroundings rather than advertise their significance. As she approached the entrance, she felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that had preceded every major milestone in her military career. Inside, she was greeted by Colonel James Rodriguez, the school's commanding officer. He was a lean man in his 40s with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent significant time in combat zones. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, and his manner suggested that he was someone who valued competence above all else. Staff Sergeant Martinez, he said, leading her down a hallway lined with photographs of distinguished graduates. Or should I say, Ghost 7? Your reputation precedes you, even if your identity has been something of a mystery until now. Sarah smiled nervously. Sarah will be fine, sir. I'm still getting used to being identified with that call sign in civilian settings. Colonel Rodriguez stopped in front of a conference room and gestured for her to enter. Inside, 3 other instructors were waiting. Master Sergeant Lisa Chen, an Army sniper with multiple deployments, Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres, a Marine who had transitioned to Army training programs, and Chief Petty Officer Amanda Ross, a former Navy SEAL sniper who now specialized in advanced marksmanship instruction. These are the people you'd be working with, Rodriguez explained as Sarah took a seat at the conference table. They're all experienced shooters who understand what it means to operate at the highest levels, but none of them have achieved what you achieved in Afghanistan. Sarah looked around the table, reading the faces of her potential colleagues. What she saw was curiosity mixed with respect, the kind of professional interest that serious practitioners showed when meeting someone whose accomplishments had become legendary in their field. Before we talk about the position, Master Sergeant Chen said, We'd like to understand your teaching philosophy. How do you take someone from good to exceptional? What separates the snipers who make routine shots from the ones who can perform miracles under pressure? Sarah considered the question carefully. It was something she had thought about during her years of maintaining rifles, wondering how to pass on not just technical knowledge, but the mental discipline and intuitive understanding that made the difference in critical moments. The technical skills are teachable, she said finally. Ballistics, weather reading, equipment maintenance, camouflage, observation techniques. Any dedicated student can learn those things with enough practice and good instruction. But what makes the difference in extreme situations is the ability to maintain perfect focus while everything around you is falling apart. She paused, organizing her thoughts. That shot in Afghanistan wasn't special because of the distance, though that was impressive. It was special because I was able to maintain the same level of concentration and precision that I used on the range, even though I knew that missing meant watching American soldiers die. That kind of mental discipline can be developed, but it takes specific training and gradually increasing levels of stress and pressure. Gunnery Sergeant Torres leaned forward. How do you train someone to handle that kind of pressure? How do you simulate the knowledge that lives depend on your shot without actually putting lives at risk? Sarah smiled, remembering her own training progression years earlier. You start with artificial pressure and gradually make it more realistic. Time limits, physical exhaustion, simulated combat stress, equipment failures, changing weather conditions. You create scenarios where students have to perform perfectly despite increasing levels of distraction and difficulty. She gestured toward the window, where they could see part of the training facility. But the most important thing is building confidence through repetition and success. When someone has made 1,000 perfect shots under controlled conditions, they have the muscle memory and mental framework to make one more perfect shot when it really matters. Chief Petty Officer Ross nodded approvingly. That's consistent with how we approach training in the SEAL community. Building skills in layers, gradually increasing complexity and stress until performance under pressure becomes automatic. Colonel Rodriguez had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. We know about your record, we know about the shot that made you famous, and we know why you left active duty. What we need to understand is whether you're ready to be back in this environment, working with weapons and tactics that might bring back difficult memories. Sarah appreciated his directness. It was a fair question, and one she had been asking herself since Marcus first mentioned the possibility of returning to the sniper community in a teaching role. Sir, I won't pretend that there aren't difficult memories, she said. Losing my spotter, having to leave a career I loved because of the target on my head, watching other people use the rifles I could only maintain. But those experiences also taught me things that could be valuable to students here. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. I know what it feels like to make a shot when everything depends on it. I know what it's like to lose a teammate and have to find the strength to continue. I know what it's like to achieve something extraordinary and then have to walk away from it. Those aren't just technical lessons. They're human lessons that could help prepare students for the realities of operational deployment. Master Sergeant Chen smiled. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need here. Too many sniper schools focus only on the technical aspects and ignore the psychological preparation. Students graduate with perfect marksmanship skills, but no understanding of how to handle the mental pressure of real-world operations. Colonel Rodriguez stood and walked to a wall map showing various training ranges and facilities. If you accept this position, you'd be developing curriculum for our advanced course. Students who are already qualified snipers, but who need to develop the skills for extreme range shooting and high-pressure situations. He pointed to several locations on the map. We have ranges out to 2,500 meters, various terrain and weather conditions, and simulation facilities that can recreate almost any operational environment. Your job would be to design training progressions that take good snipers and turn them into exceptional ones. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been missing, the opportunity to use her knowledge and experience in a meaningful way without having to worry about personal safety or enemy targeting. "There's one more thing," Rodriguez continued. "This program is classified at a level that would protect your identity and location. Students would know you by your instructor designation only. Your real name and background would be known only to the staff here and to the higher command levels that need to know. You could serve again without the visibility that made you a target before." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the training ranges where the next generation of Army snipers was learning their craft. In the distance, she could see students practicing on various courses, instructors providing guidance and feedback, the careful progression of skills development that turned ordinary soldiers into precision marksmen. "When would I start?" she asked, turning back to the group. Colonel Rodriguez smiled. "How about tomorrow? We have a class of 12 advanced students who could benefit from learning about extreme-range shooting from someone who has actually done it at the highest level." Sarah felt a surge of anticipation unlike anything she had experienced in years. The prospect of returning to the world she loved, of sharing her knowledge with people who needed it, of serving again without sacrificing her safety or anonymity. "Sir, I accept," she said. "But I have one request." "What's that?" "The first thing I want to teach them is the importance of the spotter-shooter relationship. That legendary shot in Afghanistan wasn't mine alone. It belonged to me and my spotter equally, and any advanced sniper needs to understand that principle." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Agreed. Team building and communication will be fundamental to the curriculum." As Sarah shook hands with her new colleagues and began discussing the details of her new position, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving active duty, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal satisfaction. She was going to use her skills and experience to prepare other people for the challenges she had faced, to help them achieve their own moments of excellence under pressure. Outside the conference room, Marcus Thompson was waiting in the hallway. Sarah had asked him to be there for the conclusion of her interview, partly out of gratitude for making it possible, and partly because she had come to trust his judgment about military matters. "How did it go?" he asked as she emerged from the meeting. "I start tomorrow," Sarah replied, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice. "Advanced sniper instruction, curriculum development, preparing people for extreme-range shooting and high-pressure operations." Marcus grinned. "Outstanding. The sniper community is getting back one of its legends." Sarah shook her head. "No. The community is getting an instructor who happens to have some relevant experience. The legend was always about the shot, not about me personally. Now I get to help other people make their own legendary shots when the time comes." As they walked out of the building together, Sarah felt a sense of completion that had been missing from her life for years. She had found a way to return to the world she loved while maintaining the safety and anonymity she needed. More importantly, she had found a way to serve again that honored both her own achievements and the memory of her fallen spotter. The woman who had once been Ghost 7 was ready to create a new generation of elite marksmen, passing on not just technical skills, but the mental discipline and team bonds that made impossible shots possible. Her story had come full circle. From maintenance contractor back to the heart of the sniper community, where her knowledge and experience could have the greatest impact. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching again. And somewhere in the future, one of her students might find themselves in a situation that demanded an impossible shot at an impossible distance under impossible conditions. When that moment came, they would be ready, carrying forward the lessons and legacy of the sniper who had once been known only as Ghost 7.